I'm just going to do a quick run through on the Democrat Republicans versus the Federalists and how they um, really viewed politics, kind of give you that sense of an overview. I'm not going to read it through because you guys can kind of read this for yourself. But understand that Federalists believe that you need people that have a vested interest in the success of the country. That people with a vested interest in the success of the country are going to be more inclined to make sure the country is stable. That having too many people, voting in elections can lead to chaos, can lead to mob rule, the problems of factions, that kind of thing. The Republicans, on the other hand, believe, especially in the case of like Madison, feel like it's gone, like the Federalists have gone too far. That in their search for stability, what they've done is essentially create this rule of aristocracy. So you've got kind of a different view about how much do we trust ordinary people? Do we trust ordinary people to be informed and to vote, or do we not trust ordinary people? We see that today when we're talking about who should vote, how should people be informed, the role of apathy in voting. There is certainly a trend in voting today that the more people that have become allowed to vote, the more apathetic people get, the less special it becomes. You have a lot of people that, oh yeah, I forgot to vote. Oh well, or there's nobody good to vote for, so I'm just not going to vote. Instead of really embracing it as part of their civic responsibility. I think the one commonality that both parties would have seen is that it is your civic responsibility. If you are a citizen of the United States, you should absolutely be voting. You should vote in every election in which you can have a say. So local, state, national, I don't care, right? You should be voting because that's what you should do. That's your responsibility. You pay taxes, you participate in the system. If you want to have a say in how things are being run, whether it's at the local level or the state level or the federal level, you need to go out and vote. Now, in order to go out and vote, you need to understand how the voting system works. In other words, we have a two-party system. We have a two-party system that means that I'm not going to like every candidate out there. I'm not going to like everything a political party says. I may not agree completely with the Republicans or the Democrats, or I may not agree completely with this representative or this candidate. But I need to find one that most represents my views, and I should go vote for them. I always use the example that, I vote and I'll show my political stripes a little bit. I always go vote in the Republican primary. Regardless of how I feel about Republican policies. Simply because in the state of Texas, if I want to have my vote count, I need to go vote in the Republican primary, even if I really don't want to. And so I think it's important for you to understand that you have to get over. And I think this is something that both parties would have agreed with, both the Democrat Republicans and the Federalists, which is that you have to get over I have to have a candidate that I agree with completely. A lot of us have to do what Hamilton did, right? We have to look at the situation and go, yeah, well, I don't agree with this person, but I think they're the better candidate. And you have to cast your ballot, even if you kind of, baby barf in your mouth, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to do this, right? Because democracy is about your ability to vote. Now, the key difference here is, do we want voting to be limited or do we want voting to be expanded? And I think we certainly see this today. One of the concerns that I know you see with the gerrymandering case is that, and gerrymandering is a big issue in the state of Texas, right? The idea of voter ID and gerrymandering is about limiting democracy, limiting either the variety, like splitting a county or a voting district so that certain groups are not as fully represented as other groups, and so they have wasted votes, or by simply making it tougher for people to go vote. I mean, this is where you get the debate about, having the election on a Tuesday. Why can't we have it on the weekend or something like that? or in the state of Oklahoma, where they've actually reduced the number of polling places. So it takes longer to vote. Those are little subtle ways that you can limit participation in the democracy. And, why would you want to do that? So I think this is the thing that the Democratic Republicans were concerned about, which is, why would the Federalists want to limit democracy? I don't know that it's that they truly disagreed that that people should have a say, and that people with a vested interest should have a say. But I think the Democrat Republicans trusted the American people a lot more, trusted them to be informed, to embrace their citizenship, and they were certainly very concerned that trying to limit access to the vote was done for what I would say nefarious, negative, bad reasons. And so I think that's kind of, I think you can see shades of that today when we talk about voting rights and that sort of thing. Core difference has to do with interpretations about the federal government, interpretations about the Constitution. So again, this debate about the Constitution goes back to the very beginning. Now, I would argue that the fact that they debated it in the very beginning means that it is meant to be interpreted, but that's just me. There's several Supreme Court justices that would not agree with that, and there's several that would. So you as a person, as a responsible American citizen, are going to have to decide how you feel about a strong central government or a weak central government, and you're going to have to decide how you feel about the interpretation of the Constitution. Do you want it to be loose, or do you want it to be strict? Because, and there's pros and cons both directions, right? There really are. So you have to, as you become an adult, as you become voting age, as you start to learn more and understand more about how our government functions, what you should begin to do is develop an opinion about how you want that interpretation of the Constitution, and where you feel like it can be stretched and where you feel like it can't. This right here talks about kind of the economic interests. You do have some foreign policy issues here as far as being pro-French or pro-British. That's really more tied to the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, that's very situational specific. But I think if you set aside the situational specific of the French-British debate, what you're looking at are these questions about taxation, and you're going to see that taxation for Federalists, in the sense of, we want to help. We want to help businesses. We want to make sure that businesses are protected. And then you're going to have your Democrat Republicans that are more about this kind of Commonwealth approach. Unless, of course, you believe that support from businesses and manufacturing is the Commonwealth. Now, we know, looking backwards, because we can take the present with us, that the future of the country was with industrialization, was with manufacturing. So had the Democrat Republicans been able to hold on to this agricultural mindset, the United States would have fallen behind. It's because this business support does kind of carry through. So you've got that issue. Now, when we talk about tariffs, income tax will replace the tariff. So eventually the conversations about tariffs will become conversations about taxes. At this point, it's a little hard to draw a straight line there. It's really more about, are we going to support businesses or are we not? I think that the problem is this part of the equation is hard for us to translate into modern terminology, because industrialization worked, right? So we don't really have this question about agriculture. And even what agriculture we do have is often corporate farms. So you don't really have the myth of the small American farmer. What was that ad a few years ago about, thank a farmer or whatever? The myth of those small family farms, those are really the exception, not the rule. The estate tax that's being currently touted as, we're going to get rid of the estate tax, really isn't going to benefit farmers at all, because there's not enough farms like that. Most of them are corporate farms, an agribusiness. And so, these are real questions that I think, as we've become industrialized, the system has shifted. So this part of government and business, I think we really have to look at historically. But it is kind of important to know where they are, because I think it informs us as we move into talking about Andrew Jackson and the pre-Civil War era and all that kind of stuff. The question about a national debt, we have this conversation today, right? Is a deficit good or is a deficit bad? Should we ignore the deficit? Who cares how much money we owe? It doesn't matter. Who cares what our credit rating is? Or do we care about, yes, we need to pay this thing down. We need to raise taxes, or we need to cut spending, or we need to do both, or whatever, in order to take care of this deficit. Of course, the Federalists believed in kind of a managed debt and to kind of controlling this in a way that was good and positive, whereas the Democrat Republicans, being very agricultural minded, saw debt as negative, right? And they wanted to have state banks that they could turn to, because the state banks would have kind of a looser money supply. They could print money. At this point, we don't have a Federal Reserve, so we don't have state banks printing. I said that badly. We don't have states printing money. You have state banks that are connected with the Bank of the United States that can then issue lines of credit, I guess is the better way to say this. So because the state banks are able to issue lines of credit, that allows for a flexible money supply. So the irony is they don't want the national government to have debt, but they want farmers to be able to go get debt. But because the Democrat Republicans understand how dangerous debt can be because of their own experience as kind of agricultural people, or at least being sensitive to agricultural issues, they're going to perceive debt as a negative thing. Whereas for businesses, these are investment opportunities. And I think that's a very unique way to look at it. And we still have that conversation today over deficit spending and, what should we do about it? Now, what should we do about it part of it has changed dramatically since 1800. Because of the income tax and because of industrialization and that kind of thing. But I do think it's kind of interesting to recognize that. And you've got, of course, this idea about the Federalists believing that the government should be bigger and stronger, and that even if that meant challenging some of the free speech, kind of infringing on a few, kind of reining in some of those personal rights, whereas the Democrat Republicans distrusted a large government. So you can see that absolutely today and how people approach politics. So there's really nothing new in some of this. Regional differences, again, you've got some very profound regional differences, with the Federalists being primarily in the north and in the cities, and the Democrat Republicans being frontier areas, artisans, shopkeepers, immigrants, that kind of thing. So lots of kind of interesting differences that happen here. And one thing, so you want to understand this historically speaking, but you also want to kind of understand how this kind of how we can interpret this within today's politics. Obviously, first and foremost, even though the Democrat Republicans are we could say the ancestor of the modern Democratic Party, it doesn't take very long to figure out that, those two don't have anything in common anymore. And that is absolutely the case, right? So the Democrat Republicans will eventually become the Democrats, but they have changed dramatically. And there's a couple of times that the Democratic Party makes this transition and kind of metamorphs into something else. You'll see one of these in the precursor between Jackson and the precursor to the Civil War. You'll see another one during the New Deal. And so that kind of switch is going to be very important in understanding political parties. So one of the challenges we have when we look at Federalists and Democrat Republicans is we see shades of modern politics, right? You can't help but see the shades of modern politics, but at the same time, you can't draw straight lines because everything's changed a little bit. Not only has the economy changed profoundly, not only has the world changed profoundly, not only has technology changed profoundly, but the issues of the day have changed profoundly. So we need to understand these two foundational parties because they will be very important as we move towards the Civil War. But also we need to understand them for the things we can learn from them about how political parties can change, about how issues change over time. and how finding a way to compromise can be very, very important. And when parties don't compromise, I don't care what their composition is or what their platform is, when parties don't compromise, you have true problems. And so hopefully this kind of helps you have a sense of the political framework. The Federalists will ultimately die out, and we'll be going into that more when we get to the War of 1812. So they'll go away. That's why I said the Democrats are the only party that have a heritage that goes all the way back. But again, you know, most historians would say, yeah, but the Democrat-Republicans didn't look anything like the Democratic Party. So I'm not sure that they're like second cousin once removed kind of thing, you know. And the Federalists, of course, will go away completely. And learning how they go away, again, I think it really kind of informs us that there's nothing new under the sun, and that politics has always been messy. We've always had divisions. We've always had political parties, and the strength of the country is in finding ways to come together and compromise. And unfortunately, fortunately, those compromises require strong leadership. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that I see anybody on the horizon right now. But typically speaking, I don't know that you know good leaders until suddenly you need good leaders. So hopefully we can find somebody in the near future that can help us begin in 2017 to come up with the compromises that really kind of continue the strength of the Constitution. All right, that's it for the New Nation.